The moment Damien helped Jaehan to stand up, the system turned all red, warning the boys of the upcoming danger. It tells them that the intense magical energy is filling the surroundings. Due to the formation of a domain, magical power is continuously decreasing. Due to the formation of a domain, stamina is continuously decreasing. Beware of the upcoming monster wave. Looking at his own hand, Damien could feel it. The domain was absorbing the resources of living creatures within the space to summon specific monsters, which made it some kind of infinite loop summoning magic circle. Jaehan tries to warn Damien about the dangers of Alistair, but it was all good. After all, Damien had already beaten him once before. The moment Damien mentioned that he had met Alistair before, the monster's red eyes started to glow brightly, finally recognizing Damien once again. Seeing that he knew who he was, our boy started to laugh, taunting Alistair for finally recognizing him. Recalling their previous battle, Alistair went into full rage mode, his powers unleashed with all its might, as he declares that Damien the unholy beast shall die right now. In return to Alistair unleashing his powers against them, Damien's first move was to use the witch doctor's skill called Dark Apocalyptic Harvest, which he uses by stomping his foot covered in a dark aura, sending a shockwave that disrupts the incoming monster wave. The use of that one skill was strong enough to send the humanoid creatures flying into the barrier, cracking it into pieces. Jaehan was watching the battle closely, wondering what kind of power Damien was using to fight. He continues to watch Damien closely, whose body is now covered in that black aura. He continues to stand alone against Alistair, even as the system warns him that his defense, magic resistance, and resistances to status effects have all been decreased drastically. But to Damien, it meant nothing. Jaehan couldn't believe with his own eyes the power that the main character was giving off. Even with his three brothers combining their strengths, they had struggled against what Damien was easily fighting off, by merely kicking them away with a single stomp. Even though he was curious about what kind of power Damien was using to fight against the monster wave, Jaehan knew that this wasn't the time for it, and opened his system. He decided that he needed to record this battle somehow, including all the monsters and the stars he and his brothers had found. First-time encounters with such formidable beings had to be recorded on his stream. Seeing how strong Damien was, Alistair was taken aback by it, but Damien was moving on to his skill. Removing the gloves, the rune of greed, the grasping hand, is activated. The system informs Damien that thanks to that relic, he was now absorbing Alistair's HP and MP, which in turn allowed him to start conjuring another one of his witch doctor skills. The skill that Damien unleashed next was summoning his wolves in their blue aura. Being attacked by it, Alistair started to realize what this skill was exactly. He curses at Damien for copying and using the same skill he had. But all our boy did was laugh in his face, continuing the fight against him, as he tells the monster to show him an even better skill so that he can copy it. In their exchange of blows, Damien manages to let out a powerful punch, resulting in a massive hole on Alistair's body. Jaehan continues to watch the battle unfold closely, his mind blown by how it was possible for Damien to inflict such a wound with a single hit, especially when he and his brothers couldn't do anything. Looking back at his system, Jaehan knew that the recording on his stream was going to be a massive hit online. Reading through the comments, he notices that most of his viewers were saying that Damien was the person they were watching right now. It turns out that Jaehan didn't know that the player wearing the wolf costume was actually Damien himself. After dealing the massive blow, Damien stood back, asking Alistair about how it was possible for him to not change since their last encounter. Triggering a flag, Damien's eyes started to focus on what was happening before him. Alistair did change, now in his new form, even bigger and deadlier than before. Seeing this new side, our boy was stunned, wondering what was up with the tentacle-like thing with a mouth. As he wondered what this new form was all about, the tentacles suddenly came up close to his face. As its mouth started to open, a bright flash of light started to pour out, causing Damien to cover his eyes as he needed to avoid what was coming. Failing to dodge, Damien ended up being hit by the tentacles, and was sent flying and crashing into the barrier of the domain. As he recovers from the hit, Damien was pissed off, as Alistair was doing weird stuff again. But before he could recover fully, something else started to happen. A huge hand-like tornado wave was coming straight for Damien, who was still chilling on the ground. Seeing the incoming attack, Damien could only call it insane. From outside the domain, the sounds of bone crunching and beating could be heard. After some time, Damien's vision started to blur after receiving the waves of hits from Alistair. As the system informs him that the domain in the field had disappeared, Damien's eyes were completely white as he tasked out from the pain of the attacks. Even Jaehan was laid out on the ground beside him. Alistair approaches the both of them, his hands stretched out as he notices that Damien had grown even stronger than before. But unlike the previous encounter, this time, Alistair was determined to set things straight. And so, he summons a huge tornado with something in it, using the skill called Curlicue of Nushtan. A red serpent appears within the tornado. This is the serpent living under the skill mountain known as Golgotha, where the demon of greed, Curlicue, resides. After the Sin War, the arrival of the Saint of Sin and the Seven Sins was characterized by their savage and intense presence, leading to divided opinions on whether it's a type of demon or a malevolent spirit. Its species was a demon and type as a champion. A special note was given by the system that this monster, being a spirit, cannot exist in the physical realm, so it has a characteristic of not being able to stay long in the intermediate realm. But the abilities it exhibits vary, greatly depending on the means and capabilities of the summoner, so one must definitely flee when facing it. Alistair has that main character vibe now as his eyes started to glow brightly. With two giant serpents on his side, he promises Damien that their fight wasn't going to be as easy as before. Seeing the two giant serpents with Alistair, Jaehan continues to lay on the ground, convinced that even if his elders were alive, there was no way that they could win this battle. The overwhelming force that Alistair was giving off was so strong that he wouldn't dare to challenge it. Jaehan had given up, believing that all his efforts were for nothing. But not all hope was lost as Damien somehow made it to the top of one of the serpent's heads, sitting on it all easily, asking Alistair if this little eel was something new he was raising. Even with blood flowing down his head, Damien still taunts Alistair, mocking him about how much food raising these serpents would cost him each month. Even Chirpy was making fun of the monster. Seeing Damien still alive, Alistair was right in thinking that our boy wouldn't die that easily. With a single wave of his hand, the two giant serpents started to move, their eyes focused on Damien, ready to kill him. But he manages to get away, landing far enough from the danger. Damien tells Alistair that if he really thinks about it, then his god should be the one that is wrong. Hearing that, Alistair was confused by Damien's words. Our boy continues to tell him that the god he worships, Balak, was also a bottom feeder, and that everything about the Lord of the Underworld and such is fake. So the question is there any worth acting like a king among rabbits when there's no tiger on the mountain? So he reminds Alistair to know his proper place as cultist fools. Those words angered Alistair, as it was a direct insult to the god he serves. The darkness approaches silently, whispering in the ears of the faithful, deceiving their eyes and ears. Alistair warns Damien that his faith is not so shallow to be swayed by his vile words, and that he was going to separate his flesh and spirit to offer as a sacrifice to the coming Messiah. That will be the rooster crow announcing their grand plan is near, and a testament to his absolute faith towards the Messiah. That marks the end of the speech given by Alistair as he points his tentacles with mouths towards Damien again. Sensing the danger, Damien greets it with a smile on his face, as he finally got Alistair to get worked up over his words. He then casts his Witch Doctor skill called Phantasm, which is a unique spirit skill of the Witch Doctor that teleports the caster to a designated location within a 10-meter radius, which allowed him to teleport right behind Alistair without him knowing, turning his aura into a sharp blade. Damien intends to end this fight with a straight blow to Alistair's head, but the monster manages to block the attack just in time by transforming into a pillar of aura. But that wasn't the end of the attack. Damien lunges back at Alistair, this time unleashing a mad wave of strikes filled with aura, piercing through the monster's body multiple times. The cultist definitely felt the pain behind Damien's attack as he groaned in pain over it. But as soon as Damien backed off, the system turned red once again, warning Damien that Gullici's copper snake, Nehushtan, roars. It turns out that the two giant serpents were taking part in the fight. Both of their mouths were aimed at Damien as a light appeared within them. Their skill called Death Echoes twists the mana flow of those who hear it, hindering spellcasting and skill activation, causing stun and damage by itself depending on the physical condition. The powerful magical sound waves are approaching. Beware of various status abnormalities and attacks. Instead of backing away from the incoming attack, Damien smiles and charges straight towards it. Before long, he appears right in Alistair's face, telling him that he wasn't a fool that falls for the same trick twice. charging for a powerful strike. Red streaks of aura were unleashed the moment Damien slammed down his fists. With excitement in his eyes, Damien had unleashed his skill called Bloodlust. It causes continuous bleeding in exchange for berserking the target, increasing attack and movement speed by 300% for 180 seconds, and health decreases by 1% per second. Health does not drop below 1%. Attacks in a berserk state have a 33% chance to cause the target to bleed, and the caster absorbs blood from bleeding targets to create a bloody shield. As soon as his attack lands, Damien backs off Alistair's body, aiming his palm towards him instead, gathering the red aura into the palm of his hand. Revealing a new skill, he sends out a beam of power that hits Alistair. This is the Witch Doctor skill called Qi Gong Cannon. Seeing the power of his attack, Damien tells Chirpy that striking first is the key to winning. No matter how powerful the summon is, if the main body is weak, it's useless. Damien was playing it smart in this fight. Instead of fighting the two giant serpents, he aimed for Alistair, who summoned them. The moment he was dead, the two giant serpents wouldn't exist anymore. Just as he thought that he had won the battle, a huge shadow casted over him. Damien turned around to see what it was exactly. It turns out to be the two giant serpents, their mouths aimed right at him at close range, prepared to fire. Damien could only curse once again as he gets devoured in a bright light from the serpent's attacks. After the flash was gone, a huge ravine was seen in the forest from where they stood. Damien had barely survived the two giant serpents' surprised attack, wondering what kind of crazy eels they were. As he sat there, the system informed him that Jae-han had died from the attack. Annoyed by that fact, Damien spoke out loud that Jae-han should have logged out far away from where they were, and that he was only able to survive due to the skill Phantasm, which allows him to teleport. Looking at the scene of the attack, Damien's eyes were drawn to something in the hole that the giant serpent attack had created. Within the massive hole was an endless amount of dead bodies stacked over one another. Chirpy was confused by what they were seeing, believing that their battle was over a graveyard. But to Damien, a 10-year veteran of the game, this was a whole new experience. He was seeing this type of corpse for the first time, which made him believe that this was some kind of necromancer work, who dealt with twisted mutants, which was like the simply dominated and enhancing monsters like a patchwork predator. But even with all these bodies, Damien knew that it wasn't enough to summon Balak, the Lord of the Underworld. Now Damien had to face the two giant serpents by himself. Alistair was also recovering from the damage he received, complimenting our boy for being different, as even the seeds of the false gods, the Han brothers, didn't catch his eye like he did. Alistair was also impressed that Damien was able to contain his power inside his body, and be able to make it his own, using it as a dagger to harm him, making Damien a vile greed worthy of the sovereign of all darkness, a force to be wary of by the false six gods. But still, to Alistair, the power that Damien has was utterly feeble, merely a star that has already died once at the hands of the false gods. Alistair continues to rumble on, saying that only the Messiah, rising from death, will save the world, and for their mission following the dawn will continue until the end of the world. Behold, heretic, with your vessel, we will boldly rise and form an army, and pull down the false from the high heavens. Damn, for a virtual game, it's getting real creepy. Sensing that poop was about to hit the fan, Damien tells Chirpy to get ready, cause the real fight was just beginning. Wasting no time at all, Damien activates multiple Witch Doctor skills, Plague Aura and Blood Cravings. He alone stood against Alistair and his demonic serpents. A mere Witch Doctor against a cultist of an evil god. He leaps into the air, with the blood shield broken, and even the formation of the dark apocalyptic harvest domain collapsed. Damien has to face those two snakes and Alistair at the same time. This was going to be an extremely difficult challenge, but in the end, Damien still smiled at his situation. After all, it was something worth dying to try.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.